The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Chapter 11. The Pirates are Homesick. When Tom reached the camp, his friends were asleep. When they woke up late in the morning, Tom said nothing about his visit to his aunt. All that morning, the boys played, swam, and fished. Then they sat on the river bank. They were all homesick, but none would say so. Tom wrote the name Becky in the sand with his big toe. He rubbed it out at once. Then he wrote it again. He wanted to see his aunt and Becky. Huck had no home, but he also wanted to go back to the village. At last, Joe said, "I want to go home." "Let's go fishing," Tom said. "I don't want to go fishing. I want to go home," said Joe. "Let's go swimming." "I don't want to go swimming. I want to go home." "You are like a baby," said Tom. "You want to go home and see your mother." "Yes," Joe said. "I want to see my mother." "You want to stay here, don't you, Huck?" "Yes," answered Huck. Then he said quickly, "No, I want to go back with Joe. It's lonely here. I know it's nicer here, but it's lonely," he repeated. "Let's all go back home, Tom." "No," Tom said. "I'm staying here. If you want to go, go. But I'm not going with you." Huck and Joe walked towards the river. They were ready to swim across the village. Tom shouted to them, "Wait a minute, wait. I've got something to tell you." He ran to his friends. He told them about his plan for Sunday. They listened to him. They laughed. "That's a good idea," they said. Then they went back to the camp with Tom. They had their dinner. After dinner, Huck took out his pipe and began smoking. Huck was used to smoking. Tom and Joe wanted to try. They were pirates, and pirates always smoked. Huck made pipes for them and gave them some tobacco. Tom and Joe began smoking. "Why, this is easy," said Tom. "I like smoking." "So do I," Joe said. Both boys went on smoking for several minutes. Little by little, their faces became pale. They dropped their pipes. "I'm not feeling very well," Joe said. "I feel sick," said Tom. Both boys rushed to the trees. Huck sat there waiting for them. He had to wait a long time. When the boys came back, they looked very weak and ill. "How are you feeling now?" Huck asked. "Better," they said, but their voices were weak. Their faces were still pale. They sat down, but they did not say anything more. Later, Huck said, "I think I'll have a smoke now." "What about you two?" Both boys quickly answered, "No, no." Chapter 12. The Storm. The boys were glad to go to bed that night. They slept well till midnight. Then a fearful storm awakened them. They were sleeping under some trees when the storm began. The lightning flashed across the sky. The thunder roared and rolled. Soon the rain was pouring down like a river. To the tent, shouted Tom. But the noise of the storm drowned his shout. He rushed towards the tent. His friends followed him. They were wet through when they got there. They stood there shivering. The wind grew stronger. Soon it blew the tent away. The boys ran for shelter under a tall tree near the river. They were very much afraid. The noise of the storm was fearful. Tree after tree fell with a crash. Each boy was thinking, "Will the wind blow a tree down? If it does, ah." The storm ended at last. The boys crept back to their camp. But now there was no camp. The tent was gone. The ground was covered with broken branches. Everything was wet through. For a long time they could not make a fire because the sticks were so wet. They tried and tried again. At last they succeeded, but they felt tired and ill. How they wished that they were at home again, in their own warm beds, comfortable and safe. The sun came out again and the boys got dry. They sat round their fire, but they did not talk much. They did not feel happy. They were thinking of home all the time. They were wishing that they were there. Tom began to talk about his plan for Sunday again. This made them all feel more cheerful. They played a game of Red Indians and fought one another till they could fight no more. They felt more and more cheerful. It was their last night on the island. The next day was Sunday, and then they would return to the village and home. That was a happy thought for all of them. Huck took out his pipe and began to smoke peacefully. He asked Joe and Tom if they wanted to smoke. Both boys answered as before, no, no. Chapter 13 The Funeral Service. In the village, everybody was talking about the boys. Everyone was sad. How sad Aunt Polly was, and Mrs. Harper and Becky. Every time Becky heard Tom's name, she began to cry. That Sunday morning, the church bells rang out sadly. The people of the village walked slowly to the church for the funeral service. Aunt Polly was there with Sid and Mary. Mrs. Harper was there with all her family. All of them were wearing black clothes. The sad service began. Everybody was crying while it was going on. Many women were crying loudly. Then suddenly the church door opened. People turned round to look. They could not believe their eyes. Tom was walking in. After Tom came Joe, and after Joe there was Huck. Were they the ghosts of the drowned boys? The singing stopped. The crying stopped. Oh, exclaimed everybody. The boys were not dead. They were alive. How glad everyone was. How happy Aunt Polly was. How happy Mrs. Harper was. They threw their arms around Tom and Joe. They kissed them many, many times. Nobody welcomed Huck till Tom said, Huck, come back too. Isn't anybody going to kiss Huck? I am, Aunt Polly said, and she kissed Huck warmly. Huck's face went very red. He was not used to kindness. Tom's plan had succeeded. The boys had planned to return to their village for their funeral service. They had hidden themselves in the village until the service had begun. Then they had entered the church. Everyone was kind to the boys. They were given a very big breakfast. They enjoyed it very much. After breakfast, Aunt Polly said to Tom, Why didn't you come back before? I thought you were dead. Why didn't you come and tell me you were safe? You don't love me. You don't love me, Tom. If you did, you wouldn't stay away. I do love you, Auntie, Tom said. I dreamt about you. That shows that I was thinking about you, doesn't it? Well, yes, Aunt Polly answered. Then she asked, What did you dream, Tom? Tom then told her his dream. Chapter 14 Tom's Dream. I dreamt, began Tom, that you were sitting here with Sid and Mary and Mrs. Harper. It was on Wednesday night, I think. Yes, it was. That's right, Tom. Go on. There was a wind and it nearly blew the candle out. You said, Shut the door, Sid. And Sid got up and shut the door. Why, Tom? That's wonderful. Go on. Then you said, Tom wasn't a bad boy really. He was naughty sometimes, but he was never a bad boy. Yes, I did say that. And then? And then you began to cry. Mrs. Harper began to cry too. And she said that Joe was a good boy, really. She was sorry that she had whipped him. That's true, Tom. That's all true. I must go and tell Mrs. Harper about this. It's really wonderful. Then Sid said that I wasn't a good boy. Yes, yes. And you said, how can you say that, Sid? Tom was always good to me. I punished him too often. I was too hard on him. You were crying all the time. That's how it was, Tom, just like that. Go on. You talked about the raft and the funeral service on Sunday, but you were crying so much that I couldn't hear everything. Mrs. Harper was crying a lot too. Then Mrs. Harper said that she had to go home. You went to bed then. So I did, Tom. Well, this is really wonderful. Can you remember anything else? I'll have to tell Mrs. Harper about it. When you were asleep, I kissed you. Did you really, Tom? Did you really? Really, Aunt Polly? You are a good boy, Tom. I always knew that you were a good boy, really. Aunt Polly was very pleased. She looked very happy. She went straight to the cupboard in the kitchen. She looked for the nicest apple there. She gave it to Tom, saying again, I always knew you were a good boy, Tom. Sid had listened to Tom's story. At the end of it, he looked very thoughtful. That's a very strange dream, he thought to himself. Chapter 15. Tom is in trouble. After his adventure on Jackson's Island, Tom was a hero to the other boys. They all admired him and they envied him as well. Tom and Joe told their adventures to the boys 100 times. The boys thought that Tom and Joe were great men, and so did the girls. Becky wanted very much to speak to Tom, but Tom was very proud now. He pretended to like Amy Lawrence more. Poor Becky was very sad. When Tom saw that, he was pleased. One day, when Tom was talking to Mary Austin, Becky said to Mary, Oh, Mary, will you come to my party? Mother has said that I can invite all my friends. While Becky was saying this, she was looking at Tom. She was hoping that Tom would ask to come, but Tom paid no attention to Becky. He turned round and began talking to Amy. All the boys and girls wanted to go to Becky's party, all but Tom and Amy. Poor Becky was so sad that she cried, but after a time she dried her eyes and smiled. She had thought of a plan. Becky sat down near Alfred Temple. They began to look at a picture book together. They both laughed loudly over the pictures. Tom heard them laughing. At once he was jealous. Suddenly he did not want to talk to Amy anymore. She seemed to him quite stupid. He left her and went home. How he hated that Alfred Temple with his fine clothes. When Tom had gone, Becky lost all interest in the book and in poor Alfred. She did not want to look at another picture. She jumped up and shouted to Alfred, Go away, I hate you. At first, Alfred could not believe his ears. Then he understood everything. He had never liked Tom. Now he hated him. He hated him and he wanted to hurt him. How? What could he do? Alfred went into the classroom. He saw Tom's spelling book on his desk. He opened it at the page for the next lesson. Then he poured ink all over that page. There he said to himself, That will teach you, Thomas Sawyer. Mr. Dobbins will whip you, and I shall be glad. While Alfred was doing this, Becky looked in through the window. She kept quiet, thinking, I hate Tom Sawyer. I shall always hate him, always till I die. Let Mr. Dobbins beat him. I'll be glad if he does. Tom found more trouble waiting for him when he got home. Aunt Polly was very angry. What's the matter, Auntie? That dream, I told Mrs. Harper about it. But it wasn't a dream, and you knew that it wasn't. That it wasn't, Tom. Joe had told her that you were really here that night. Now Mrs. Harper thinks I'm an old fool. I know she does. It's all your fault. Poor Aunt Polly began to cry. Tom felt very sorry and ashamed as well. It wasn't dream, Auntie, that's true. I really did come that night. But I came to tell you that I wasn't dead. I didn't want you to worry. I'm very sorry, Auntie. Is that the truth, Tom? It is. Oh, it is. And did you really kiss me, Tom? Yes, I did. Because I do love you, Aunt Polly. Aunt Polly began to look happy again.